we can identify a core of world classics that could be incorporated in different ways, into different degrees, and at different stages in all the major cultures, I think that's the way to deal with the problem. There's no reason to deny the Chinese or the Japanese the right to get a hold of their own tradition first. That's what we do. Right? Now, when I say get a hold of it, I don't mean you're a master of it, but at least you're exposed to some of the main issues that ought to be considered in any human culture or human society. And then you can recognize, if you read Confucius, you read the Analects, that many of the things he is concerned with are similar to those in the West. Okay? The answers may be a little bit different, and historically and socially they might differ, but you can almost always see a common human core underneath this. And I think that's what we assume, that you want to be able to respect what is fundamentally human in all cultures, even though the idea would be that you're recognizing commonalities at the same time as diversities. If you just talk about diversities and not commonalities, then you're going to go wrong. If you just talk about commonalities and not recognize differences, you're also going to go wrong. The two things have to go together.
I'm clearly in your generation much more by far than the young undergraduates behind me. But there was a professor from law from Yale who recently wrote a book which was highlighted in Time magazine with the caption on the cover, Tiger Mom. And basically her message was that basically in the West, we ruin our young people who are in school because we let them goof off too much. We play sports and games and Twitter and whereas in her with her children, they had to like play the piano 6 hours a day, and they weren't able to watch TV and that sort of thing. This group, the young people here, in the next decade or maybe 15 years, they'll be bringing the next generation of children into the world. And so that, they have to decide in their minds what kind of, are they going to be tiger dads, or are they going to embrace the sort of liberal, do what you want, which seems to pervade our society.
May I suggest an intermediate position? And put the question to my son Paul.
I'm sure he doesn't want us to speak to the issue.
Huh?
I'm sure he doesn't want us to speak to the issue. I didn't read the book, but
How many have heard of Tiger Mom? Does anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
She makes the argument that in the West, we adopt a perspective on raising children that we have to protect their self-esteem because they're going to fail at things that they try, and we should make sure that they keep their head up and smile and make them feel good so they try new things. And that's the important way to go about raising a child. But she says that we're actually failing our children by not forcing them to keep up with tests until they succeed. And that actually, if you make a child be in a situation where they fail multiple times and then ultimately succeed, that's how you really build their self-esteem. And she tells an anecdote about basically making her youngest daughter sit at a piano for 6 hours, unable to play a difficult 4-against-3 passage, because it's just tricky and you have to get the knack of it. And she just kind of, in a way that would be demonized by Western mothers, makes her child do it over and over and over again. And they really get into a screaming match. And then eventually she just does it, almost by magic. And they're on great terms again, because she made her child do it, and in a way that would be demonized, but she succeeded, it actually ended up with more self-esteem building.
depends on the material you're dealing with too. She may have had very talented daughters, but it'd been very terrible if the daughter never got the piece.
Well, I do think that one of the larger challenges that is throughout, as you look at one of the commonalities is the question of personal identity. And that's definitely part of growing up. It's part of what our fraternity here is all about, helping people establish a sense of identity within the community. And I think we've all been impressed by the Japanese in their reaction to this disaster, that the cheerfulness with which they suffer in a way.
Organized.
They have a sense of identity within the community. And I think that's maybe easier in the Asian world because of that excessive sort of, the sense that you need to shape the child more carefully than we do. We come from a frontier, background in our country, and people that value the ability to create your identity out of all the challenges that are ahead of you. So we prize, situations where people can take an unstructured situation, do something new, invent something, create something. Those, I think, are significant differences between the cultures, and they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think probably, that it's inevitable that to some extent they'll come together, but hopefully people will join them in a way that preserves the strengths and minimizes the weaknesses.
I just throw it.
A very high suicide rate. Do you still have a very high juvenile suicide rate? Of course, she was a Chinese American, but in Japan, at middle school, and after some grade exam experience.
Well, I have a rather different point of view from most people who write theoretical things about differences in countries and so on. For example, I have had experience of teaching in Japanese universities. And at a very good university, there's not much difference from Columbia or other good American universities. But in Japan, there's a rather rigid system of retiring people at 60, and then they can't teach at government-sponsored universities after that, but you can teach at private schools, private universities. And my teaching experience in these private schools was absolutely dismal. The students paid very little attention to the lectures. They talked freely while they were going on. They laughed with their friends. And I thought maybe they just don't like my lectures. But I asked the other teachers there about this, and I had a very interesting explanation. These young people were raised before television sets, and they are free to look at the television when they like to. They are free to talk when the television is on. They are free to laugh, whether it's funny or not. And they adopt the same attitude in their classrooms. I don't say this is universal, but it's by no means unusual. And my impression is that that the idea that the Japanese are being devoted to perfection and so on is true of some people, and it's not true of everybody. And I think that there are people young people who lead very meaningless lives, who do not think about their family or their country or anything else except their next pleasure. And to idealize these people by saying that they are in some way more serious than we are, more devoted than we are, I think may be a very serious misconception. This is not a theoretical attitude on my part. It's an experience born from my irritation with people who weren't listening to me, and my feeling of what can I do to make these people interested in their own country's literature.
Yes.
I guess following up on that point, I think especially when studying it or trying to explain, there is a tendency to fall into sort of this binarism, the dichotomy of the East-West, but especially within current events, as we've seen with the nuclear power issue or the economy. I mean, there are these